I don't usually travel alone, and I've never been the kind of person to overthink hotel decor or read too deeply into room numbers. But there was something immediately, viscerally wrong with the Hallcroft in the moment I stepped inside. I'd booked it last minute through one of those shady third-party apps when my original hotel had a water leak, and although the photos online made it seem charming in a sort of rustic, haunted but cozy way, the real thing was different. The lobby was dim, not from a lack of lighting, but because the walls themselves seemed to absorb light, drinking it in and giving back only a dull, sickly hue like the yellow of old paper soaked in nicotine. The woman at the front desk didn't greet me so much as acknowledge me, her lips pressing into a line as she handed over the key, a real metal key, not a card, marked simply, 304. She didn't ask for ID, didn't confirm my booking, didn't even smile. When I asked about the room I thought I saw on the corner plaque just off the elevator, room 237, she froze. Not dramatically, not in a jump scare kind of way, but subtly, like her entire body stopped breathing for just a second. Then she spoke, calm and emotionless. "There is no room 237, sir." I laughed awkwardly, said I must have been tired, and she said nothing back, not even a blink. I found the elevator more unsettling than I should have, mostly because there was no music, no floor indicator above the door, and the moment it began to rise, I swear I felt it drop briefly before it went up. I got off on the third floor, expecting the usual uniform hallway, but the corridor was broken into weird angles, like a blueprint that had been drawn by someone who hated straight lines. I passed room 301, 302, and 303, and then a stretch of empty wall where 304 should have been. I turned a corner, heart already pulsing with that creeping anxiety you feel when something familiar has been ever so slightly altered. That's when I saw it again. Not clearly, but enough to make my stomach drop. A flicker, a shadow of gold numbering on a deep maroon door, tucked behind an arched hallway that hadn't been there when I passed it 5 seconds earlier. 237. I blinked. It vanished. Just clean, undecorated wall now. I reached out, touched the wallpaper where the door had been, and it was warm. Too warm. I told myself I was overtired, that business trips always messed with my head, and that maybe the receptionist had been right. Maybe there was no room 237. But that night, as rain hammered the windows and the wind outside moaned like it was pushing through 1,000 rusted pipes, I heard 3 knocks. Sharp, hollow, deliberate. Not from my door, but the wall directly beside my bed. And just as I sat up, holding my breath in that awful kind of silence that makes your ears ring, my bedside clock changed, without a sound, without a flicker, from 2:36 a.m. to 2:37 a.m. The moment it did, the lights dimmed. A whisper threaded through the room like smoke. And I swear to God, in a voice that wasn't mine, that didn't belong to anyone I knew, I heard the words, "You weren't supposed to see it." I didn't sleep that first night. Or if I did, it was the kind of sleep that feels like being submerged in a black, silent liquid. No dreams, no warmth, just the weight of something pressing down on your chest that doesn't stop when you wake up. When the morning light finally crept through the curtains, I sat up with a pounding in my skull, like my body was trying to warn me before my mind could catch up. I told myself the whisper at 2:37 a.m. was a hallucination, maybe the wind, or my own thoughts echoed back at me, warped by exhaustion. But when I got up to brush my teeth, something in the mirror wasn't quite right. The reflection looked normal, but not synchronized. A half-second delay, like my own image was buffering. And for just a flicker, maybe less than a blink, my reflection didn't move at all. I froze, watching myself watch me, until the motion caught up. I didn't scream, didn't panic. I just stood there, toothbrush in hand, waiting for logic to return like a coward hiding behind reason. I went down to the front desk around noon, trying to act casual as I asked if the elevator was working correctly. The receptionist, same woman from last night, tilted her head slightly, almost like a marionette jerking on an invisible string, and then said something that chilled my bones more than the whisper ever could. "You're on the 3rd floor, Mr. Keller," she said slowly, carefully, "but the elevator doesn't go to the 2nd floor. It hasn't in years." I opened my mouth, ready to question her, but something about the way her lips barely moved, as if forcing each word out against gravity, made me shut up. I turned to leave when a glossy pamphlet on the counter caught my eye, the Hallcroft Guest Guide. I took it, thinking maybe I could flip through it later, but when I opened it upstairs, I felt my skin go cold. Inside, beneath the welcome message and Wi-Fi password, was a section labeled Hotel Conduct and Protocol. And listed under bullet point 3, Please refrain from wandering the halls between 2:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. This includes attempts to revisit doors that no longer exist. That night, I did everything I could to avoid sleep. I drank coffee until my hands trembled. I played music, watched mindless shows, paced the room, even left the lights on, but somehow, without meaning to, I dozed off. I woke again at 2:36 a.m., my heart already pounding, as though it had been running without the rest of me. The light in the room had dimmed, not turned off, but dimmed as if something was leaning into the bulb and swallowing it. Then came the sound, soft, dragging, like something heavy being pulled across carpet just outside the door. I sat up, completely still, as the noise grew louder, closer, and then stopped. I stared at the door for what felt like hours, then glanced down at the floor, and saw something that made my stomach twist into a cold, whatnot. A shadow, not from the light in my room, but from something invisible just outside, was cast under the door. But it wasn't shaped like a person. It was too tall, too narrow, and moving not pacing, but swaying, like it was listening. Just as I began to lean forward, a note slid under the door, slowly, deliberately. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was a torn page from the hotel guest guide. Scrawled in thick, uneven ink were the words, "You look too long. You'll have to come back." The strangest thing about the second night wasn't the whisper from the wall, or even the way my alarm clock changed time without ticking. It was the silence. Not the kind of peaceful quiet that makes you feel safe or at home, but a heavy, pressing silence that clung to the air like fog, thick and unnatural, the kind of quiet that seems aware of you. I woke up before the whisper this time, drenched in sweat despite the room being cold enough for my breath to fog the mirror. I remember staring at the ceiling and feeling, with complete certainty, that if I moved, even slightly, something would notice. I don't know how long I lay there, muscles locked, trying to breathe silently through my nose, but at exactly 2:37 a.m., I heard something impossible. It wasn't a voice this time. It was a sound like dragging chains, slow and deliberate, somewhere above me, even though I was already on the top floor. It stopped directly above my bed, and then came a knock. Directly on the ceiling. 3 times. After sunrise, I tried to shake it off. I convinced myself I was overtired, jet-lagged, maybe having some kind of stress-induced hallucinations from work piling up. But the weight of that night didn't fade. I wanted to leave the hotel right then and there, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe something worse, kept me from checking out. I went downstairs and asked the woman at the front desk, the same emotionless receptionist with skin so pale it almost looked translucent, if there was anyone else staying in the rooms above me. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned a page in her check-in ledger, deliberately, slowly, like it had weight, and said without looking up, "There is no floor above the 3rd, Mr. Keller. You're at the top." I asked her again, this time not hiding the edge in my voice, and she smiled, a small, almost broken thing, like someone had described a smile to her once and she was trying to recreate it from memory. Then she handed me a folded piece of paper from beneath the counter. I unfolded it expecting a bill or receipt, but it was a page from the hotel's guest rulebook. At the bottom, in tiny red print, there was a single sentence I swear hadn't been there before. If you hear knocking between 2:30 and 3 a.m., do not respond, no matter where it comes from. Later that evening, I tried to leave my room around 10, just to get some air, maybe walk outside, clear my head. But when I opened the door, the hallway wasn't there. I don't mean it looked different. I mean it wasn't there at all. What stood outside my door was a narrow, dark corridor lined with faded wallpaper I hadn't seen anywhere else in the hotel, wallpaper patterned with faint symbols I couldn't quite make out, like runes scribbled by someone trying to remember a forgotten language. There were no lights in this passage, just the faint orange glow of a single bulb flickering far down at the end, swaying gently like it had been recently disturbed. I didn't step out. I didn't breathe. I just shut the door, turned the lock, and backed away slowly until my legs hit the edge of the bed. But here's the part that truly rattled me. When I turned around to sit, there was a card resting on my pillow. The same kind you'd find in hotels offering laundry service, only this one was handwritten, shaking and messy. It read, "Do not follow the hallway. You found it once. That was a mistake." I had every intention of checking out that morning, shoving my clothes back into my bag, grabbing the room key, and walking out without looking back. But something about the hotel kept pulling me in like a hand around my ankle just beneath the surface of deep water. I had barely slept, again, though I couldn't tell you whether it was due to the distorted hallway that replaced my door the night before. or the card that had appeared on my pillow with handwriting that looked less like it was written and more like it had been scratched into the paper by something desperate and not entirely human. The moment I opened my eyes, before I even had the chance to process where I was, I heard it, a whisper, faint but close, like it was inside the walls. At first, I thought it might be the pipes or maybe a TV left on in the next room, but it didn't stop. It was a child's voice, soft, rhythmic, repeating something that didn't quite sound like language, like a lullaby spoken in reverse. The walls were breathing. That's the only way I can describe it. They weren't moving, not exactly, but the air pressed and released as if the entire room was exhaling around me. When I leaned closer to the vent above the nightstand, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it, the voice stopped. Dead silence. Then it spoke directly, clearly, and in the unmistakable voice of a young girl. "You shouldn't have seen the door," she whispered. "Now it remembers you." I wish I could tell you I ran right then, but I didn't. I sat there for a long time, listening, waiting, half hoping it would start again so I could convince myself I'd just imagined it. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder, placing it beside the vent, then left the room and forced myself downstairs to the hotel cafe, if only to be around other people, to hear anything that might drown out the buzzing panic in my chest. But the cafe was empty. Not quiet, empty. Tables were set, breakfast laid out, steam rising from untouched mugs as if people had just gotten up to leave, but there wasn't a single person in the room. Even the staff had vanished. I called out once, maybe twice, before my voice began to echo in a way that shouldn't have been possible in a room that small. That's when I noticed a folded napkin on my table. It hadn't been there when I walked in. I picked it up with trembling fingers, and this time, the handwriting wasn't shaking. It was perfect. "Stop recording us." That was it. Just those 3 words, written in ink so dark it had bled through the napkin onto the tablecloth beneath. When I returned to my room, the recorder had stopped. Not because I had set a timer. Not because the battery had died. It had been turned off. Manually. I checked the file and played it back, expecting nothing but static, but there was something. Breathing. A whisper. Then footsteps. Light at first. Then heavier. Then a voice, not the girl this time, but a low, ragged, throat-torn whisper, barely coherent but filled with malice. "He's still here," it said, and then again, closer. "You won't leave us again." Then the sound of the bed creaking, a weight shifting, and finally the sound of something breathing right next to the microphone. The recording ended with the sound of it being shut off. I stood there, frozen, staring at the vent. I could feel cold air brushing my face, but I knew it wasn't air. It was breath. And I swear to you, for a moment, I saw a child's eyes staring back at me through the grate. I wasn't looking for the hallway when I found it again. In fact, I was trying to do the opposite, get out of that cursed hotel and never return, erase every trace of it from memory, book a different flight home, start over. But something had shifted in the layout of the building, as if the walls themselves had been waiting for me to make that decision. When I stepped into the hallway outside my room, the floor beneath me felt wrong, softer, like walking on something that could breathe. The carpet was slightly damp, not with water, but something thicker, almost sticky, and the wallpaper was curling at the edges like old skin. I turned left toward the elevator, but it was gone. Not out of order, gone. In its place was an unmarked fire door that pulsed gently inward as if something behind it was exhaling with each of my steps. And though every instinct in my body screamed not to open it, though my hand shook like it was resisting my own movement, I touched the handle anyway. It was ice cold. And when I pushed it open, I saw a hallway I'd never seen before, long, narrow, endless, lit only by a single flickering bulb at the far end, swinging from a wire with no ceiling above it. I stepped inside because I didn't know what else to do, and the door shut behind me with a sound like stone slamming shut in a tomb. This corridor didn't feel like the rest of the hotel. The air smelled wrong, sour, chemical, like rotting paint and scorched fabric, and every few feet, the walls bowed inward just slightly, enough to make it feel like the space was tightening around me the deeper I went. The carpet here was a dull brown, stained with something darker that trailed along the edges like dried blood mapping a forgotten route. I passed doors, dozens of them, each unnumbered and sealed shut, each with strange symbols carved into the wood, symbols that made my stomach twist and my vision blur if I looked too long. But then I saw it. At the end of the corridor, where the light flickered the most violently, stood a door that should not have been there. Room 237. Only this time, the numbers were backwards, mirrored like something from a dream or a nightmare. I don't remember walking toward it. I only remember the cold metal of the handle pressing into my palm, and the way the door opened before I turned it. Inside was darkness, not pitch black, but a deeper kind of absence, as if the room itself consumed light, memory, sound. But I heard something, very faint, music. A lullaby played on an old music box, soft and broken, like it had been underwater. I stepped inside, and the door behind me clicked shut without being touched. The walls were covered in old, yellowed photographs, each one nailed crookedly to the plaster, each one burned slightly around the edges. They were all of me, at different ages, different places, some I recognized from childhood birthdays, others I'd never seen before, including one that showed me standing in this exact hallway, looking terrified, behind the very door I had just entered. I wanted to scream, but the air was so thick it felt like sound wouldn't survive in this place. And then, through the silence, something moved in the far corner of the room. Just shifted, like it had been waiting for me to arrive. And as I stepped back, the door behind me vanished. Vanished, like it had never been real in the first place. If you've ever walked into a room and felt like it had been waiting for you, truly waiting, like it knew the exact moment you'd step inside, you'll understand the weight of what I felt when the door to room 237 sealed behind me. The air wasn't just thick, it was wrong, as though every molecule was saturated with memories that weren't mine, and yet, somehow, were. There was no switch on the wall, but the second I took a single step forward, the room lit up, faintly, by the glow of an old rotary phone sitting on a table in the corner. The phone didn't ring. It was already off the hook, as though someone had been speaking into it, and stepped away just before I entered. The moment I approached, static poured from the receiver, crackling softly like rain on glass, until a voice, distant, strained, almost choked, cut through it and whispered my name. Not once, not twice, 3 times, each slower than the last. I picked it up without meaning to. The second the receiver touched my ear, I heard something I haven't told anyone before, my mother's voice. She's been dead for 13 years. But there was no mistaking it. She was crying, not sobbing, just these trembling, shallow breaths. And she said the exact words she said to me when I was a child and got lost in the supermarket. Don't move. I'm coming to get you. The light shifted then, not brighter, not dimmer, but redder, as though the room was filtering itself through blood-soaked glass. I turned around, and what I saw next froze every muscle in my body. There was no furniture, no walls, no door. Just corridors, spiraling out in every direction like roots digging deep into the earth, corridors lined with photographs, all of them of me. Some from childhood birthdays I remembered, others from moments I don't. One showed me asleep in my bed, my apartment bed, hundreds of miles from this place. Another showed me walking into this very hotel lobby just 3 days ago, only the timestamp said March 17th, 1996. I was 8 years old that year. My vision blurred. I stumbled back, heart pounding like it was trying to break out of my chest, and that's when the room shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. Across from me, on the other side of the corridor, a figure stood, same height, same build, me. But his eyes were black voids. His mouth was open far too wide, his jaw unhinged like something that had forgotten how to be human. He didn't move at first. He just watched me, then tilted his head, mimicking the way I'd done it seconds earlier. And when I blinked, just once, he was suddenly closer. A step, then another, and behind him, the walls began to peel open, showing rooms I didn't remember but somehow knew. I ran. I didn't know where, only that I needed to get away from that thing that wore my face like a mask. Every corridor led to another version of the room, some brighter, some flickering, some with nothing inside but mirrors that showed people I didn't recognize staring back at me as if they had always been waiting. One room smelled like the cologne my father used to wear, and inside was a broken crib, rocking on its own. Another had a chalk outline on the floor, still fresh, and as I passed, the lights flickered violently and the word "stay" was scratched into the wallpaper in something that looked like blood. I turned another corner and saw something that stopped me cold, myself, asleep in the bed back in room 304, tossing and turning, caught in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I reached for the image, desperate to claw my way back into it, and just as my fingers touched the glassy surface of the wall, the voice returned. Not from the phone this time, not from the vents, but from inside my own mouth, whispering in a voice that wasn't mine. You were never supposed to leave. You're the last piece. And then everything went dark, except for a heartbeat that wasn't mine, echoing from the walls. The first time I saw him clearly, I thought it was a mirror. I mean, how else would you explain standing face to face with someone who looks exactly like you, down to the scar under the left eyebrow you got falling off your bike at 10? Or the way your right shoulder leans slightly when you're tired? But mirrors don't breathe, and this thing did. I watched its chest rise and fall, slow and deliberate, like it was taking in the room for the first time, savoring it, consuming the same air I was trying to hold in. At first, he didn't move. He just stood in the threshold of the room with the red-lit walls, one hand slightly curled at his side like he'd been holding something moments ago, and let it go. Then he smiled, not a grin, not a smirk, but the kind of smile that comes too easily to people who know things you don't, who've seen the parts of you you're too afraid to admit still exist. I stepped back instinctively, but he stepped forward, one foot, then another, perfectly matching my pace, as though gravity tethered us to each other. The moment I turned to run, I heard it, not a voice this time, but a sound like a mouth opening wider than it should, wet, unnatural, and somewhere inside that sound, there was laughter. My laughter. I don't remember how I got back to room 304. I remember running, yes, but the hallway didn't follow logic anymore. It folded on itself, twisted in impossible geometry, stretched out behind me like elastic and then snapped back in place without sound. I must have passed that same flickering wall sconce 6, maybe 7 times before I found my door again, though I'm not convinced it was ever gone. I slammed it shut behind me, heart thundering like a warning bell in my chest, and collapsed against the door, clutching the handle so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't expect to be safe, but I thought maybe, just maybe, the room would act as a barrier. But when I looked across the bed, I saw something I haven't been able to explain. I saw myself, sleeping, in the bed, wearing the same shirt I was wearing, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, eyes twitching in REM sleep. And worse, I saw movement in the mirror, not a reflection of me by the door, but him. My double. Standing by the bed. Watching. Leaning closer. His hand reached down, and his fingers brushed the sleeper's face, gently, affectionately, like a parent waking a child. And then he turned and looked directly at me. He smiled again, this time wider. My lip bled when I bit it. The room fractured after that. I don't mean metaphorically, I mean literally. The ceiling cracked like glass under pressure, and behind it, I saw stars. Not the kind from our sky, different, wrong, moving too fast, too sharp, like they had eyes. The air began to buzz, not with electricity, but with a kind of presence, like the space itself had become aware of me. My reflection in the window wasn't copying me anymore. It was ahead of me, moving just seconds before I moved, predicting every twitch, every breath, like it knew what I'd do next before I did. When I blinked again, it was gone. The bed was empty. The mirror was dark. And yet, I could still hear breathing, ragged and wheezing, coming from somewhere behind the walls. There was a knock, not on the door this time, but from inside the closet. Slow. Deliberate. 3 times. I opened it, even though I knew I shouldn't have. But it wasn't empty. There wasn't space. There wasn't even depth. Just a black tunnel, pulsing with a heartbeat that wasn't mine. And before I could pull away, a hand reached out, my hand, and touched my face. Cold. Dead. Familiar. After what happened in the closet, after I felt my own dead hand stroke my cheek like a promise, I knew I couldn't keep pretending this was just some waking nightmare or elaborate psychotic break. There was too much structure to it. Too much intention behind every impossible moment. I left my room without packing, without looking back, without even locking the door, and I marched straight to the front desk like I had any power left to demand answers. The same receptionist was there. Her name tag had been turned around since the moment I checked in, but now it faced forward. L. Simmons. She didn't seem surprised to see me, didn't flinch when I slammed both palms onto the counter and asked her what the hell was going on in this place. She just tilted her head in that same puppet-like way, like gravity was pulling her strings, and said with a perfectly calm, eerie softness, "You're not supposed to remember." And then she did something she hadn't done before. She reached under the counter, pulled out an old black binder labeled Guest Ledger, Archive, and slid it toward me. The pages were yellowed, handwritten in blue ink that had bled through in places, but the names were legible. All guests. Most of them crossed out. A few names had red dots next to them. I started flipping through, skimming until I saw it. My name, Daniel Keller. Check-in date, March 17th, 1996. Room assigned, 237. Status, unresolved. My mouth went dry. I stared at it for a long time, willing it to be some clerical mistake or an eerie coincidence. But there was no way around it. That was my name, in handwriting far older than this version of me had any right to be. That's the date I went missing as a child for 6 hours in a shopping mall, a memory I'd buried until recently, the one my mother always said never quite made sense. I asked her what unresolved meant, but the receptionist was already gone. The lobby behind the counter was empty, lights flickering, bell silent. The binder still lay on the desk, but when I opened it again, the ink had smudged into black swirls that moved slowly across the page like something alive. I backed away slowly, stomach twisting, lungs tightening, and that's when I heard it, footsteps from behind the front desk, not hurried, not rushed, but deliberate, slow. I couldn't see who or what was walking, but the sound they made didn't match human shoes. It was more like claws dragging across ceramic tile. I fled into the administrative office behind the counter, hoping to find someone, anyone, with a face that didn't twist reality, but instead I found shelves full of VHS tapes labeled with numbers instead of names. They were sorted by dates, dozens of them, spanning decades. My hands trembled as I picked one marked 237-031796-K. It wasn't just my name. There were more, all initials, some marked resolved, others marked transferred, but most had no notation at all. There was an old TV in the corner of the room, a dusty VCR already waiting, as if expecting me. I pushed the tape in and pressed play. Static crackled for a moment, then cut to a security feed, black and white, time-stamped and grainy, but unmistakably showing the hallway outside room 237. And there I was, or at least, a version of me, 8 years old, standing in front of the door, reaching for the handle. The footage skipped, then showed the same spot, empty. And then it cut to another date, yesterday's. I was there again, adult me, same spot, same door, reaching for the same handle. And then, static, but not silence. From the VCR speaker came a voice, not recorded, not part of the tape, live, whispering, in the voice of the receptionist, "You were the first, and you'll be the last." I always thought the scariest thing about being trapped somewhere was the idea that you couldn't find the way out, but now I know what's worse, finding it, over and over, and realizing it's not real. After the tape, after hearing my name whispered in the voice of someone who shouldn't be alive, I made a decision that I believed, in that moment, would break whatever spell the Hallcroft had placed over me. I went back to room 237, not just to confront it, but to destroy it. I carried a fire axe I found in the emergency box next to the stairwell, one I had walked past 100 times but never seen until now, as if the hotel had hidden it until it decided I was finally allowed to see it. I approached the hallway where the door had always been, and, just as expected, it was already waiting. Door closed. Brass number gleaming. The moment I raised the axe, the light above it shattered, not flickered, shattered, glass falling around me in slow motion, and the air grew heavy with that now familiar static hum, like the walls were holding their breath. I swung hard. The blade struck the wood and bounced back as if I had tried to cut through iron. I screamed and swung again, harder, again and again, but the door didn't so much as dent. Then the numbers on the plaque began to twist, visibly twisting, forming new digits, then old ones, then finally back to 237. Only this time, the brass had begun to melt. The hallway itself started to shift then, not collapse, but reconfigure, like the entire structure had simply decided it no longer needed to obey the rules of geometry. Doors slid sideways across walls that bent like rubber, corners turned themselves inside out, and in the distance, I heard something groaning, not mechanical, not human, something in between. Like the hotel had lungs and it was beginning to wake up. I turned to run but found myself back in the same place, again, somehow still in front of 237, though I hadn't taken a step. My body was moving, but the space around me had become a loop, folding in and collapsing with every breath I took. I turned back to the door, and it opened on its own, just a crack, and from within, a low warmth spilled out like breath from a sleeping animal. I didn't want to enter, but something else took over, something that felt like memory and fear combined. And then came the voice, not from the room, not from the walls, but inside my head. "We can make it stop," it said, and though the words were soft, they boomed inside me like a bell struck underwater. "You don't have to carry it anymore. Give us what you don't want to remember." I asked it what that meant, But deep down, I already knew. The air grew thick with images, not physical ones, but memories, like they were being played across the inside of my eyelids. My mother, crying in the hospital hallway. My father screaming at the wheel of a car before everything turned black. A basement door. A locked chest. A voice I had buried for decades whispering, "Do you remember now?" The hotel wasn't just haunting me, it was feeding off of what I'd hidden. Off my guilt, my trauma, my lost time. I stumbled backwards, mind fractured, and that's when the room offered a choice. Not aloud. Not even through a hallucination. Just a feeling clearer than any sound. Stay and forget everything. Let go. Live inside peace and never remember who you were. Or leave. Leave and carry it forever. I stood at the threshold of that offer, shaking, teeth clenched, trying to hold on to something real. And then, through the haze, I saw something in the distance. The front desk. The lobby. The outside world. It was flickering, like a signal just barely coming through. A way out. And then another voice, this time, my own, from the other version of me I had seen in the mirror, whispered behind my ear, "Pick wrong, and we both stay." It didn't feel like a choice anymore, not really. Standing there, with room 237 behind me glowing like a furnace of forgotten things, and the flickering image of the hotel lobby ahead like a mirage just out of reach, I knew whatever decision I made would not simply affect where I ended up, but who I remained. The hotel wasn't a building, not exactly. It was a memory machine, a parasite constructed from the weight of forgotten trauma, feeding off the versions of ourselves we hide and fracture to keep going. I realized then that the thing that had worn my face, the other Daniel, wasn't just a reflection or a ghost. He was the version of me I abandoned the day I disappeared as a child. The boy who opened the wrong door and never came back. He had been down there all these years, echoing inside the space I refused to remember, and now he wanted to switch places. The choice wasn't between staying or going, it was between becoming whole again, or leaving that broken piece behind forever and pretending I had never been here at all. So I walked, not backward into the warmth of room 237's false comfort, but forward, through the corridor that bent and cracked like an old film reel melting in its projector. The deeper I moved, the more my mind burned. Faces flickered in the walls, my parents, strangers, children I didn't recognize but felt some soul-deep pull toward, like they were all pieces of me or pieces of others the hotel had consumed. My ears filled with voices layered over one another in languages I couldn't understand, weeping, laughing, pleading, whispering one name over and over, Keller. Not just my name, all of us, the unresolved, the forgotten, the vanished. My knees buckled. I crawled the last few feet toward the light, and as I reached it, just before my fingers crossed the threshold, something grabbed my ankle. It was cold. Familiar. Not malicious, desperate. I turned my head and saw the boy version of me. 8 years old. Eyes wide. Tears running silently. Mouth open but making no sound. And I understood what I had to do. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I held out my hand and said, "Let's go home." And just like that, he let go. The lobby was normal, bright, unchanged. No receptionist. No guests. Just the quiet hum of a sunny afternoon. My clothes were soaked, my hands still trembling, but everything around me had reset. I turned back. The door to room 237 was gone. Not hidden, gone, as though it had never existed. When I stepped outside, my phone had service again. The date said April 1st. 1 week had passed, though I could have sworn I'd only been in the hotel for 3 days. I don't know what the Hallcroft really is, if it's a place, or a wound in the fabric of time, or some spiritual parasite that feeds on buried pain. But I know this. It lets you leave only if it decides you're finished. I don't know how many others made it out. I don't know how many are still inside. Maybe you've stayed there yourself and just don't remember. Maybe you're still inside now, listening to this, thinking this is just another story on the internet. But if you've ever heard knocking from the wrong side of the wall, or seen a door that vanished when you blinked, if you've ever been told a room doesn't exist, I need you to ask yourself something. Are you absolutely sure you ever left?